So, I guess Jonas is trying to drive really to something profound because he's trying to get to the gut issues of human existence. Part of human existence is existence as an organism, and existence as an organism is constantly having to work. That is, if our being is our own doing, and doing is work, we constantly have to struggle. And say no to death, say yes to life, keep the constant work going. And really what he's asking, I think, in the middle of this essay is really, okay, is it all worth it? Well, certainly to say that it's being an organism brings into the universe a being who has needs, who values things, values its own existence, and also values the things that it needs for its own existence. And that's, necessary for life to continue. But we can ask reflectively, really, is it really worth it? If that's all we get out of life is the chance for more life, which is basically what he says being an organism is like. We don't. The struggle doesn't produce an end product. The struggle produces the conditions under which we can continue to struggle. Really, what's the point, man? We can definitely ask that. And on page 37, in this first column, end of the second paragraph, he refers to his pleading for a yes. That is, it may be arbitrary that we value our own existence. There may be ultimately no justification for it, but he pleads for that yes. Yeah, it's good that life value itself, that life constantly say yes to itself. And he says he has two comments. In the first, he says, first is about the relation of means and ends in an organism's equipment for a living. And here he really takes into account Darwinism and evolution. When you think about it, and what he gets into there is that all the things, or most of the things, or many of the things, sorry for being equivocal, but many of the things that we value about ourselves, especially consciousness, he says, are things that are instrumental for survival. That is, why do we have consciousness? Why do we have reason? Why do we even have feelings and certainly our anatomical features and physical abilities? Well, if we believe in evolution, which we should, okay, because it's true. Apart from any religious belief, evolution is like pretty well established view of not only human origins but all living things' origins. If we give a nod to Darwinism, to evolution, then all of these things that we value about ourselves are simply things that develop by chance in order to promote our survival. Even consciousness, he says again in the first column on 37, accordingly the evolution of consciousness must bespeak its utility in the struggle for survival. So if we value our lives and the aspects of ourselves that are fundamental to being alive, the origin of those things is pretty much chance, and they were selected in the struggle for existence because they promoted our survival. So if they're just of instrumental value, why should we value them in themselves? He raises that question, and he kind of tries to address it in the second column by referring to the self-rewarding experience of the means in action. That is, even though we only have consciousness and almost all our other traits because they were selected in evolution, it doesn't mean that we don't value them and that they don't have value in themselves. So it's worth it, he thinks. Now his second comment, which he begins on the bottom of page 37, is perhaps a more serious objection to the yes, the affirmation of life, and that is that, the human race, over its many centuries and thousands of years of existence, and certainly in recorded history, has been a pretty miserable lot. Maybe an individual life will have a preponderance of happiness over suffering, but that certainly isn't true of the human race as a whole. It hasn't been in history, and in fact it isn't now. Maybe things are getting better for a lot of people across the globe in terms of their material standard of living and their comforts, but that's not true of many places in the world. People, majority of people still live lives of suffering. How do we address that? He acknowledges at the bottom of page 37, most probably the balance sheet, if we could really assemble it, would look bleak. And then, again, being the sort of humanist and the human being and the humane thinker that he is, Jonas then goes on to say, and he really has the Holocaust in mind, being a Jewish person, a German refugee, and family wiped out, I think, during the Holocaust. He has this in mind. He says at the top of page 38, and he's thinking of the victims of persecution, and there we find that almost no amount of misery dims the yes to sentient selfhood. That is, almost no amount of suffering and persecution and misery dims our affirmation of our continuing existence. Greatest suffering still clings to it. Rarely is the road of suicide taken. Never is there a survival without feeling wished for. The very record of suffering mankind teaches us that the partisanship of inwardness for itself invincibly withstands the balancings of pains and pleasures and rebuffs our judging it by this standard. That is, what he's saying is that somehow we're incredibly stubborn or durable. It's very difficult to dim that affirmation. Even the history of human misery and suffering and injustice and persecution and deprivation, that there is some spark within us, we organisms, we human organisms, that constantly affirms the meaningfulness of our continued existence in the face of what would seem to be plenty of reasons to not value it. We continually value it. So the last point, the second point we'll get to in the last talk, I promise just one more talk. And that is, okay, if we've dealt with the aspect of mortality as a burden, if that's connected with the continual possibility of death, which is an inevitable result of our being organisms, what about the blessing? Why is mortality, and how can mortality be considered as a blessing?